Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Collins, and in this episode, I chat with Caroline Santangelo, an occupational therapist who specializes in nature-based therapy for children here in Pennsylvania. We talk about self-awareness of our internal signals and explore how the use of nature can help children develop this insight. Building on our last episode, which defines interoception, Caroline shares 3 guidelines that parents can use to facilitate conversations and articulate their interoceptive awareness. She also helps us understand why movement, sensory experiences, and outdoor activities can enhance this awareness in children and why that is important in our day-to-day life. So tune in to discover how the power of the outdoors can influence the development of these skills and self-awareness in children. Hey, welcome back to the OT is In. And today I am here with my good friend, Caroline Santangelo. She's actually local here with me in Pennsylvania area and an occupational therapist who uses nature and meets most of her clients outdoors. So in the last episode, we really focus a lot on what is interoception. But today I want to know more about how do we actually impact this with our kids? How do we support our children to use this sense and, in essence, build their self-awareness, and especially outdoors, because we all have access to the outdoors. So, Caroline, let me just toss it to you. Tell me a little bit more about, first, who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So I practice in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. And I do 100% nature-based therapy as well as community-based therapy, where we're really encouraging children to get outside using their sensory experiences to help progress in their goal areas. And a big part of Starfish Occupational Therapy is helping children not only develop their goal areas, but to develop their grit, grace, character, confidence, and knowledge, which is the 5 arms of the starfish, because those are really resilient strategies that are needed in life. And when it comes to interoception outdoors, I love using the nature-based environment because our outdoor environment is just naturally the most sensory enriching experience that we can have. So it really allows families and children to organically experience this interoceptive awareness and develop these skills because we're 100% in nature and experiencing their input. One of my favorite ways to work on interoception is through movement, because through movement, we are really activating all of these internal body signals at once. So again, it allows us to internalize them and open a discussion for how we're feeling, what we're noticing, and why we're doing it.
I love the way that you mentioned, it allows you to start the conversation. So what are some questions or, conversations that we can start with our children?
Absolutely. So a big a big language that we use with interoception is, what do you notice or how do you feel? And it's interesting because every child and even adult experiences interoception differently. And
Mhm.
so it can be hard to identify what your child is feeling during an activity, but being able to provide them choices of, when we're walking in a creek and we fall into the water, oh goodness, how does that make our feet feel? Are we
Yeah.
cold? Are we wet? Are we dry? Or one of my favorite activities is leapfrog in a creek. And so this week we were playing leapfrog in the creek, and child was jumping from one rock to the next and climbing over and under the logs and getting all of this vestibular and proprioceptive input. But look at all the internal signals that are
Yeah.
being, and I could say, how does your foot feel when you're balancing on one rock? Does it feel, are you balanced? Are you unbalanced? Do you feel sturdy? Do you not feel sturdy? How does your head feel? Are you just,
Yeah.
because some kids would get dizzy with that? Or is it, is that regulating to you? And
Right.
what about your lungs when you're jumping from one to the next? Are you breathing really heavy? Or are you breathing really slow? So that opens up that conversation where instead of having to create so much,
Mhm.
it's naturally there. And sometimes the adults don't even have to facilitate it, because
Yeah.
that situation is just occurring in play. And the kid could say, oh my goodness, my foot is wet now. Or I need to take a break because I'm breathing really heavy. And that's where then the adult could say, oh yeah, when our bodies are working so hard, our heart beats fast and our lungs
Awesome.
get,
Yeah.
and then, oh goodness, what happens? We've been playing for an hour. My bladder feels full. I have to go to the bathroom now. And that
Right.
again makes it that organic experience. And I think that's so important when it comes to interoceptive work, because it can be really hard for adults and children
Mhm.
to be able to identify that.
Now, what about for children that don't really have the language with that, because that what you described are so many different adjectives and different adverbs. And, one of the things that I've talked so much about as, being homeschoolers and occupational therapists, obviously, but is how we can naturally build in this language, just be like, guys, this is language arts here. We are learning all of these adjectives and adverbs, which we also learn through story, and it kind of brings it all together when we're focusing so much on interoception. But what are some ways that you help to promote that language? Like, what if some kid is just like, I don't know?
Exactly. And that happens often.
Mhm.
So a big one that I tell families are, there's three. So big one that I tell families is, describe it yourself. So just
Mm.
in your everyday world, when you're out in nature or even when you're in the home setting, describe what these things are doing to yourself. So
You.
walking, if you're walking up a hill during a hike, oh wow, my muscles feel really tight and
Yeah.
tired. I need to sit down and take a break, because that description is really going to help children start being able to associate what the internal signals are telling them.
That.
A second one that I love to do is actual visual feedback, because I think visual feedback helps children be able to start internalizing that input. So, for example, I have a student who is working on twists and flips on their trampoline
Yeah.
and off logs in our at our nature area. And they really
That would
want
be my
to
son. I mean, it's
really
not,
want
but
to
that would
land.
be him.
They really want to land this specific jump or
Yeah.
flip. And so we're working on planning it out and the interoception and what is our body and our muscles doing differently when we fall versus when we land. And so I take
Hmm.
videos of it and I'll show them when his head is all over the place. Like, okay, so did we fell that time? How does that feel in our head? Is it,
Hmm.
are we dizzy, or
Yeah.
do we feel like we're regulated and calm? And then same with our arms. Are our arms flailing, and do they
Right.
feel everywhere, or are they by our sides? And so now, even though I'm giving him the description now, he started being able to pick it up with those internal body signals
Right.
of, then he can associate, oh, my arms are out and my fingers feel loose and not in.
Yeah.
So that visual feedback is helping, and it can't help with everything because it's, the internal body signals, of course.
Right.
But when we can do it, I think it does help then support and help the child be able to fully then develop other internal skills that we can't do the visual feedback. And I do think body check language. So I know Kaylee Mallard, she has the body check ring, and it does give parents choices for each part of the internal body signal. So,
Ooh, can you say that one again? Because I'll make sure that that's linked in the show notes, but it's the body check program.
body check ring,
Okay.
and it's Kelly Mallard. And so she has a body check ring, so it will have different choice words for the heart, the brain. And I think the brain is a really hard one. How do you describe your brain? Is it confused? Is it frustrated? Is it calm? And so it gives parents 6 or 8 choices per internal signal, and they can go back and describe using those specific words themselves. So if you're gardening outside, because now in March in Pennsylvania, we're seeing signs of spring.
Yes.
So we're gardening. And so if you're gardening outside and you're being able to describe, how does this make my heart feel? It makes my heart feel so calm. Or my knees, I'm sitting on my knee or laying on my knees on the grass. And that, how does that feel? What do I notice about kneeling on the grass? And my hands, are my hands dirty or am I clean? Because some children were just working on clean, messy versus clean on their hands and their face. So it really does, of course, become individualized.
Yeah. And I love the way that when you're talking through all of this, you're not only talking about, yes, internally for sure, but it's how does this external stimuli affect me internally? So, as I'm walking up the hill was an example you gave, or as I'm kneeling in the grass, and how is that different when I'm just, standing and looking at a daffodil? Does that help to calm me? Or, when I'm standing in the water? I think that all of these different external stimuli can really affect our internal, awareness. And so giving that language and these examples is beautiful and simple.
It's so simple. Just if we just go outside and take grounding.
Yeah.
Go out and take your shoes off. And what does that do to our internal sense? And you can, again, with the body check ring, you can go through every single part of the body if you have that time and you want to. Or you can just go outside and let your kids roll down a hill. Again, what does that make your brain do? And like I said before, everyone experiences it differently. So what was really interesting, and I had an aha moment a little while ago, was we were building a fort and I had this really cool shiny fabric that in the sun is beautiful. And I thought it so, like, I thought that it was so regulating, and to me, like, it made my eyes really calm. It made my head really calm. The light shining. So you can talk about that with the eyes too. Is it light? Is it dark? And the child said, "This makes me so dizzy. Makes my brain so dizzy looking at this in the sun." So again, our outdoor environment is always changing, always providing new opportunities because we did it in a new environment, that it was sunny. And so he was able to notice that. But we notice these things so differently. And that's why I think it's so important to help facilitate the interoception in different environments and in different ways and in different outdoor activities, because that's going to allow children to really get the gross.
And I really appreciate the conversation that you had there, how you were able to say, like, this is how it makes my body feel, and the way that, that child does. Because when we are trying to bring so much attention inward with interoception, right? It's also important to also think about the others around us and to say, we are all experiencing this different, and the way you're experiencing isn't right or wrong. And the way that, your sister or your brother or your friend down the street, or even me, isn't right or wrong. So let's talk about it together.
Exactly.
Love that.
Exactly. And it opens up so many amazing conversations. And I think it also opens up the interest with different, what our body can do and why our body does these things, but also interest in, of course, in the natural world and the outdoor environment, how it brings it all back.
Is your child constantly fearful or disruptive? Or do they crave routine or seem overly sensitive? It might be time to consider the world of sensory processing. This world, it's confusing and it can be hard to pin down. But you are the best advocate for your child, and I know you're determined to be equipped with knowledge to help support your child. After all, you are here listening to the OT is In podcast. But there is more than this one sense, and I know you want more than anything for your child to experience peace and confidence so that they can thrive. The Sensory Balanced Focus Group combines the best of both worlds, the latest research and insights into sensory processing with tips, tools, and strategies to implement straight away into your homeschool, plus a community to work through it with. I hope you'll join the Sensory Balanced Homeschool Focus Group today. You can find it in the shop at homeschoolot.com, or more specifically, homeschoolot.com/shop/sensory-focus-group. Now, back to the show. That's so great. So you said you had three. The first one was, to describe yourself and to model. The second is the visual feedback. And so what is the third way?
So the third one we chatted about a little bit, but it was more giving, again, the choices.
Okay.
So we did connect about that, but I didn't go directly through that. But that's really where I like to use Kelly Miller's body check ring and provide the child with choices to start understanding how they feel and giving them the language as well as the parents.
And I will make sure that is linked in the show notes. There's also, Kelly Mailer has an entire curriculum, and I actually have clients who are using that now as their language arts curriculum because it does bring in so many, like we were talking about earlier, the adverbs and adjectives, and talks through how do we describe ourselves and how do we really, and there's also lots of books that are along with that. And so there are several homeschool families that are using this as, if it is important for my child to be able to connect to themselves and to me. And so it is equally important, sure. Well, actually not even equally important. It is more important with that connection. So the language arts piece, they're learning alongside of it. And so it really just kind of goes together beautifully. So I will make sure that is all linked. So Caroline, we've talked a little bit about, well, actually quite a bit, but about how, our sense of proprioception and our movement is really related to interoception. And I even think about that with us as adults. We're sitting still for a long time and we're talking to this kid and that kid, and or maybe it's a rainy day outside and we're cuddled up in a blanket watching TV all day, and you stand up and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't even realize I'm hungry and I have to pee. And, all of these things that we've just kind of suppressed and ignored. So I know just naturally going outside, it's going to encourage movement, but are there ways or suggestions of activity ideas or anything like that you can just provide some parents to say, we're like, I don't even know where to start. If I just go outside, my child wants to come right back in. What is just a good starting point?
Absolutely. And that's really hard too right now, is so many children don't want to just go out and play by themselves. So having to develop that sense of boredom to learn how to play by themselves, or if there's neighborhood kids bringing in that motivation. So I think that's something that a lot of families are battling right now. But when we go specifically to the proprioceptive and the vestibular movement component, it can be really simple. Of if you have a hill in your backyard, can we just roll down the hill?
Yeah.
And do you have a fallen down tree? Let's walk on the tree on the fallen log and do a balance beam. Make it a nature-based obstacle course using all things in nature. And sometimes, again, the child might need some facilitation with the parent in the beginning to create these different movement activities. But then also it could grow where can they collect all the rocks and can they build a labyrinth out in their outdoor space, and then they're working in that turning table vestibular component. And so it could be a project if you're an older child. Honestly, just being able to get outside, and sometimes it's as simple as, hey, we're gonna go ride bikes for 15 minutes, if that's really where we're at that component. But again, I love the leapfrog and being to just being able to move our head in all different capacities. So for the younger kids, can we do animal walks in different grass or
like so
different
rocks, grass. Yeah.
exactly.
Trees, right.
Or for the older kids, just think about building a fort. If you have a single tree in your backyard, get all the fabric from outside. If you're collecting all of those logs, you're getting that that proprioceptive input by just that deep pressure input of carrying heavy items. So that is movement.
Yeah.
Sometimes your kids look at that creation of being able to build a fort in your backyard.
Yeah.
Really bringing in that excitement of and that imagination. What can we do today outside? And again, because of the uneven ground and just the natural environment continuously changing, we can get that vestibular and proprioceptive input. Another one that I love where, again, I don't want families to have to buy anything, but if you have a hammock, just set up the hammock. And that's something I bring out almost every day of my sessions, and kids just love laying in a hammock, and you're going to be building that input.
Love that. We just put ours back out and spring is coming. There's one in the backyard, and Kim Wilson and I were talking about her. She mentioned the same thing. She's another nature-based occupational therapist. So, I mean, guys, this is the second time. So clearly hammocks are a great way to help our kiddos to integrate, and activate so much of their body.
Absolutely. And I love them because they're portable. So if you're going for a hike or a nature walk, you can bring it with you and find two close trees together and you can put them right there. So they're great.
That is so great. Well, Caroline, thank you so much for all of this information. For me, the biggest takeaway, and this is said so often, but, to make sure that we are modeling and describing, for ourselves, even inside, but outdoors, if we are going out and really showing movement and then talking about it, how it can inspire our children. So that was my biggest takeaway for you today. If there's one thing that you could leave I always love to put people on the spot with this, one thing that you could leave, these listeners with today to inspire or to make sure that, we are using the power of the outdoors to even influence interoception. What's your one takeaway?
Oh, wow.
I know.
I would say, and every single child and every single adult is on their own lifelong journey. And so we're always continuously learning, always continuously developing. And I truly believe that with interoception, children will get there, and it takes times, and there's so many small wins, and we have to find the small wins. And that's really why I love nature and the outdoors too, because it's back to the basics. Let's just go back to the basics, and just sometimes just looking at a patch of flowers is so regulating and helping us with that interoception. And sometimes that's where you see the child's biggest growth, is just being simple and going back to the basics in their own journey. So I think that's really important for parents to be reminded of, for adults to be reminded of, and that simplicity of nature really allows us to accept that and understand that. And then again, that's going to bring in how our internal body signals are telling us. So just remember that it's a journey, but everyone gets there, and we're always learning.
I love that so much. And how can people find you?
Yeah, so I am Starfish Occupational Therapy on my website. You could find me at www.starfishot.com. And then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Starfish OT.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom and your activity ideas and just so many careful strategies that families can use.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it.
Thank you all for listening to the OT is In podcast. For episodes 13 through 16, we've been discussing a lesser known sense, interoception. But some would say that it's actually the most important sense. It's the foundation for self-awareness. It's the ability to identify, access, understand, and respond to the patterns of our internal signals. And understanding this sense is also the basis for communicating about our emotions and our needs. To help start the conversation with your kids, I've created a really simple question guide, even with some hints for Gestalt language processors. So click on the show notes and it'll pop up for you. Thank you for being here. It's not lost on me that there are many places that you can spend your time, yet you're choosing to be here with me, Sarah Collins, from the Homeschool OT. I'll see you next week.